So welcome everyone to our Thursday night program for the Peoria Area World Affairs Council. I am delighted to introduce Professor Arya Taski. Dr. Taski teaches history here at Bradley University. She has her PhD from the University of Arizona. She's been teaching at Bradley since 2008 and began her teaching career at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. She was born and raised in Mexico City. Before coming to the U.S. to get her PhD, she worked for several museums in Mexico, including the National Museum of History, which I have visited. It's gorgeous. There, she was the head researcher for the museographical renovation, as well as the head of the Education Services Department. So she specializes in popular culture, to understand the processes of identity and state building formation, power, and resistance in Mexico. She focuses particularly in the analysis of tavern culture, social interaction, gender roles, drunkenness, and crime in response to urbanization and industrialization during the 19th and 20th centuries. So I bet she could tell us a few fun stories. But tonight we are going to talk about suffrage movements south of the border. Not only Mexico, but elsewhere as well, whatever she'd like to share with us. And I will just draw attention to our own 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote in the United States with the passage of the 19th Amendment that was ratified 100 years ago on Tuesday night on the 18th. So in commemoration, I'm wearing my own Go Vote t-shirt for the 19th Amendment. So don't.
That's when Trump pardoned Susan B. Anthony on that day.
Yes, he did.
I thought that was very sweet of him.
It was sweet, but perhaps 100 years too late. But anyway, in any case, though, it was a sweet gesture. So I am going to mute everyone except for, of course, Dr. Taski, and I'm going to figure out how to adjust our cameras here. But with that, let you take it away, Dr. Taski.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening. As Angela kindly said, thank you for inviting me to this talk. And as Angela told me, he told you guys, I will be talking about suffrage south of the border and the different efforts from women and men in order to grant the efforts, in order to grant the right to vote throughout Latin America. And I'm not going to touch on all the countries. I'm just going to touch on the most important efforts. I will start from the 19th century and I will end in the 1920s because our story, or what we are commemorating, is 1920, right? And so coincidentally, there is a country in Latin America that in the 1920s grants full citizenship to women in that decade. So that's how I thought, oh, I can close with that, because otherwise my PowerPoint was going to be super long. So, and I needed to close at some point. And the topic of women in any way fighting for any kind of equal rights has always been at the heart, in my heart. So happy to talk about this. So is me the one that share my screen?
Yes, you can. You have permission to share.
Okay, thank you. So share my screen. How do I do? Okay, I should have practiced that. Actually,
did you find it?
Yes,
okay.
I've not seen anything, but
did you click on the green thing and then it should show you? And then you need to select the screen that you want to share. And
but it's not showing anything. It's just only saying basic plans and files.
Do you have your PowerPoint open?
Yes.
Okay. It should show up when you do the share screen.
Okay, let's try it again. Advance. Oh, nobody's can only share. I'm a host now.
You are. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
Oh, it says only the host can share?
Uh-huh.
I made you co-host. Okay, I'll make you the host then. Okay. Go ahead.
Let's see. Let's try again. Yay.
Okay. Sorry about that.
It's fine, it's fine. Sorry. Okay. Excellent. So, just a little bit. I know that you guys are very knowledgeable of world affairs, but just in case to clarify on the locations I will be talking about is anything south of the border that is in green, that is considered Latin America, because those countries speak either Spanish, French, or Portuguese. And as you know, also, so these will be, Mexico will be part of North America, Central America, and this will be South America. So sometimes I will be using Latin America when I talk about the entire region. And if I am making a comment on the local geographical region, then I will be saying particularly Central America or South America or Mexico. Okay. So as I said, I want to start with talking about the different efforts since the 19th century in the fight for the right to vote, and at least on the most well-known and documented efforts. There probably are many others, but these are the most common ones or famous ones. And we can talk first with Mexico in 1953, when a group of women from Zacatecas, that is in central Mexico, asked the government to be recognized as citizens with the right to vote. And of course, it didn't go through, but at least that is the first effort. However, for example, in 1962, in the province of San Juan in Argentina, the women asked the province government to get the right, and they are allowed to participate at least in the county or municipal election. In Chile, in 1874, there is an interesting case of a woman called Domitila Silva y Lepe, and she registered to vote under the principle that she fulfilled the requirements to vote, that was being born in Chile and know how to read and write. So with that, she participated on, she attempted to participate on that, and a group of more women continue defending and she was able to get registered to vote. Because of that, there were other women who followed her example, and in 1977, get also the registration to vote. However, in 1884, these went down because the Chilean government was concerned, particularly the congressmen were concerned about, so they decided to alter the Article 40 of the general elections law, and literally they banned the female vote, saying because the woman needs to be subjected to the decisions of the husband. So there is no need to have two different kinds of votes. If they are married, why is the need to vote if the husband already votes for them? Or if they are single, their parents, their fathers will vote for them. So what's the right, what is the purpose of having the female vote. And then we have 1984 in Mexico City. Oh, this is what I was talking about. I'm sorry, I'm going to apologize. I was telling Angela that I couldn't print my PowerPoint so in advance. So I will be talking in the PowerPoints, I forget. This is the lady that I was talking about, the widow who, because she knew how to read and write and fulfill all the requirements, was the first one in registering to vote in San Felipe. But again, as I mentioned, in 1884, there was a law prohibiting the female vote. Then in Mexico, for example, we have a publication called Violetas de Anáhuac, or Violets of the Anáhuac in English. And they were following the ideas of positivism, you know, that were very famous at the time about creating an organized society in order to achieve progress. And the women were on thinking, well, in order to improve the lives of others, in order to improve the society, we need to improve the lives of women, and we need to educate women. So in this magazine, many of the writers called women to question their role in society and their conditions. It was the most influential publication of the late 1800s in Mexico because of that, because there were many writers who were really calling for education for women, creating consciousness about how an educated woman could make a difference in their families. So the director of this publication and the one who started creating this, her name was Laureana Wright de Clenhans. She was born in a small town in southern Mexico that was a silver mining town. Of course, as you can see, her father was British, and that also allowed her to be more educated than probably the common women in that area. And she constantly wrote about female suffrage, equality for men and women, and as well as the questioning women for their role in society. Then this doesn't have anything to do with suffrage, but it's also the actions of a woman led to the creation of a republic. And that is in Brazil. This is Isabel, Imperial Princess of Brazil. She was the daughter of Emperor Pedro II, or Peter II, and very often her dad will go abroad and she will become the regent in the meantime. So in the third absence, when her father was traveling abroad, in her third time as regent, she signed the Lei Áurea, or Golden Law, that abolished slavery in Brazil. And by the time, of course, slavery was becoming more difficult to maintain. However, there were very powerful plantation owners that didn't like that. And she knew also that she was going to get enemies. But anyway, she also knew that there was a lot of opposition against her to succeed her father to the throne, because first she was a woman, then she had a strong Catholic faith, and she was married to a foreigner. So all of that created already things against her. So she decided that what it was needed at the time in Brazil. So she signs this abolish slavery. And of course, a consequence of that, then a year later, Pedro II, her dad, is deposed by a military coup, and the republic was started in Brazil. In Argentina, and probably is considered the very first place where not only women, but also men supported the right to vote for women. And with the support of socialists and anarchists at the beginning of the century and the 20th century, many women were fighting for equal opportunities and rights for men and women. We have different pioneers of that. The Elvira de Lepine de Rosson, that is, we are going to see her in the next slide, and Cecilia Gerson. But we have here in the image, Alicia Moreau de Justo. And she's is a very interesting woman because she's going to participate in the very first, in the International Congress of Free Thinkers. And after that, she starts working as a feminist full-time, and she creates this pro-right to female suffrage committee in 1906. And then the National Feminist Union in 1919. She was very well related with different suffragettes in the world, particularly in the US. For example, she participated in 1919 in the National Congress of Working Women, for example. So she was well related to many people, many women fighting for the right to vote. And these are the other women that I was mentioning, Elvira de Lepine and Cecilia Gerson. Both of them were medical doctors. And they were the first two women in Argentina who received or passed the exam to become doctors, medical doctors in Argentina. And both participated in the creation of an association in pro of the rights of women. At the same time, while in Argentina, there was this fighting for rights. In Chile, for example, since the beginning of the century, many intellectuals and politicians were saying that, well, by nature, women were not able to think about voting, and they basically needed to remain in the private sphere of home because otherwise the Chilean family will suffer. So while in Argentina we have all these advances, in Chile we have the opposite. So in Argentina we have, after that, Giulietta Lanteri. Her Italian name is Giulia Magdalena Langella Lanteri because she was born from Italian immigrants, but she was born in Argentina. So in 1910, she went to the municipal committee and said, hey, I want to vote. And they started the controversy because she wanted to participate in the national election, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And she was granted the right to vote. So she registered in 1919 for the elections, and the same year, for the first time, she exercised the right to vote. She's the first woman really in having the right to vote, even when it was just only on a municipal election, regional election. However, because of that thing, in 1919, she became the candidate to National Congress, supported by the Independent Party. She got very few votes in comparison to the totality of votes, like probably 2% of the votes of the nation, but still it was a very good presence. And Based on that, the Radical Civic Union in 1919 presented the very first project of law recognizing the right to vote. And then we have Mexico more or less at the same time. What is going on in Mexico? Well, in Mexico, the Hijas de Cuauhtémoc, or the Daughters of Cuauhtémoc, was a political club only by women who they were voting, they were supporting the no re-election, because in Mexico for 30 years, Mexico had been experiencing the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz. So these women had organized, even when they have no right to vote, they have organized to raise awareness of the benefits of stopping re-election. So when the presidential candidate Francisco Madero in 1919 was defeated by Porfirio Diaz, this president that had been in the presidency for almost 30 years, this group of women decided to support him and went beyond that, not only supporting him as their candidate, but also in the fight for justice. The whole thing of Francisco Madero defeat in 1910 led to the Mexican Revolution, which was one of the most radical social movements, the very first social movements of the 20th century, in which men and women participated. And when I'm talking about this, yes, there are several pictures of men fighting in this revolution that shook all the Mexican society at different levels, from north to south, east and west. There are very, very limited pictures of women using the weapons. But the truth is that if you think about it, no war can be fought in that period of time without women. There were many women who went along with their husbands or their sons, and they were the ones cooking and cleaning and washing the clothes. So definitely, I have a purpose on this, on why I'm mentioning the participation of women in the wartime. Among the founders of the Hijas de Cuauhtémoc, or Daughters of Cuauhtémoc, is this lady, Dolores Jiménez y Muro. She was from central Mexico in Aguascalientes. And what is important of that is not just only that she was one of the founders of this group of women who were against the re-election, but also she's going to side with the only indigenous leader of the Mexican Revolution, is Emiliano Zapata, this name, who was fighting for land and for the right of the farmers. And so she became, she fought as a colonel in his troops, and she wrote part of the Plan of Ayala that was the main document that Emiliano Zapata issued during the Mexican Revolution. She also wrote, she also had a group called Regeneración y Concordia, this one that is regeneration or regrowth and harmony, where he talked all the time about the right of women. And he wrote for different magazines, for different newspapers. She also founded the group, the Daughters of the Anahuac, and I will be talking about that later. And she went to jail for participating in all of these, was for at least 3 years. And then she continued supporting Zapata until his death. And then later on, he participated in the cultural missions created after the wartime of the Mexican Revolution was over. Another person that fought with her and also worked in the creation of the Daughters of the Anahuac, or the Anahuac, was Juana Belán Gutiérrez de Mendoza. She was from Durango, and this is very interesting. She was an indigenous woman, and her parents worked in a very large plantation, and so in consequence, she will go with them to the fields. And one day she found some kind of pamphlet on the floor, and she's on the dirt sitting, trying to make sense of what that pamphlet is and what it says. And apparently the owner of the plantation passes by, sees her very interested in trying to make sense of that pamphlet, that he taught her how to read and write. What happened? That girl is going to be later against not only the dictator Porfirio Diaz, but also begin writing for the rights of the workers in two different newspapers, Vesper and Desmonte. And she's going to be supporting the anarchists that were big organizers of workers' rights before the Mexican Revolution, that were the Flores Magón brothers. So in consequence, it's not unexpected that she was going to be founder of these groups that are going to be fighting for the revolution and for the right of women, like the daughters of the Anáhuac, Las Hijas de Cuauhtémoc. Around the same time, the socialist governor of Salvador Alvarado is going to support the first feminist congress in Yucatan. And among the different organizers is Consuelo Zavala, that I will mention it later, and she demands the right to vote. And for her and for all the women of Yucatan. And in consequence, the first thing that the Salvador Alvarado grants is the legal age for women that went from 30 to 21. And of course, unfortunately, despite the fact that the women were almost going to be granted with the right to vote, what is going to happen, though the Constitution of 1917, that is or is the official end of the Mexican Revolution, was sworn. And that was a big disappointment for all these different women who had been fighting in the Mexican Revolution. Why? Because despite the fact of all the different sources that we have about women participating side by side with men, when the Constitution came, there was almost no debate about the right of women to vote. And why? Well, because they were saying that in Mexico, the women really didn't feel the need. That's how they said, the politicians. Women don't feel the need to participate in our politics because they don't have any collective organization. And many of these women that I have been talking about were like, what? Excuse me? Well, we have been here. We have been fighting. We have been organizing all these groups, right? And, but none of them, unfortunately, despite the fact that, for example, some of them supported Zapata, a big important leader, were among the delegates to the Constitutional Congress. So in consequence, there was no voice. And of course, there was also other derogatory comments about that the nature of women did not go hand in hand with the needs of good citizens. So the Article 34 of the Constitution of 1917 says that citizens are all those who are Mexican and are 18 if they are married, or 21 if they are single and they have an honest living. I put it in Spanish. Why? I know that, and I apologize because Spanish, I put this in Spanish. But in Spanish, when you have one male person even if it's 10 women, we use male nouns, male qualifiers to make an expression. So in consequence, for many, they said, well, they are just talking about men. But some women were saying, no, wait a minute. This is a generic term. Mexicanos could be applied for any men and women. And using that argument, first, before that, there was a clarification of, can you clarify why? And again, sorry that I'm putting this in Spanish, but there was the need to clarify what they mean in this article. And one of the politicians come and said, we need to clarify this because we need to know which are the conditions for the women. Otherwise, we are in danger that they might organize, vote, and register to be elected. So in danger, okay, that they will be organized. Well, using that, the administrative assistant or the secretary of the president said, you know what? The Article 34 says Mexicanos, like male or women, right? Because it's a generic term. So I want the right to be registered for elections, and I'm going to run as a candidate. And she's the first woman in Mexico to run for an elected office. But this is more interesting, and I need to move faster. Central America, that we always think of Central America as in terms back in the day, at this time, how they were called? The banana republics, right? Because all the fruits that were imported from Central America to the US through the United Fruit Companies. Well, because of the fear that the US have been constantly invading the Caribbean region, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Costa Rica created a Pact of Unity in 1921. And in that constitution, the right of women to vote was granted. And the interesting thing of this is that not only elite women who were educated participated, also working women that only heard what the things were going on in the working places or in the markets, decided also to start organizing in order to support that union of these four countries, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Costa Rica, in order to get not only a unified front against US imperialism, but also the right to vote. And we know some of this is about the different examples of how the United States since the late 19th century had been having a growing influence in the Caribbean region and Central America with the Spanish-American War that made Cuba and Puerto Rico a colony, or Panama, the independence of Panama as part of this influence and the creation of the Panama Canal. And the justification of that was the Roosevelt corollary that said, US as a civilized nation has the right to intervene in the internal affairs of Latin American nations. So from 1898 to 1932, there were 34 different invasions in this region, Central America and the Caribbean region. So almost is one per year, basically. So everywhere we see Marines, US Marines in El Salvador, in Honduras, in Nicaragua, Dominican Republic. But back to El Salvador. So because of this fear that if we don't unify or create a front, common front, we might be invaded again. So there were different women participating in these. One of the most important groups was the seamstresses, actually, but also elite women, market women, And there was a group called the Female Committee Pro Union, all of them supporting the unification of these 4 countries. And among the main speakers or the main representatives was this woman, Victoria Magaña de Fortín. And one thing that I found very interesting is that the press have a name for all the women who were supporting this, and they were called the kind muses of the Central American Federation. Among other leaders of this movement in Central America, she is from El Salvador, indigenous woman. I want to make that emphasis because until now, I have been just only showing women of Spanish descent, but they were not the only ones. And you can see in this image, this was an indigenous woman. Is among the most famous activists. She went to jail in Guatemala, even when she is from El Salvador. She's completely pro the union of these countries, and she was the only woman as delegate of the Unionist Congress in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. But even then, that allowed the Unionist Congress allowed the female suffrage. Of course, there were discussions about the pros and the cons of this, but anyway, at the end, on September 15, 1921, the Unionist Constitution was sworn, and the Article 29 gave the right to vote to women. You have there the conditions of how if they were married, women, or single. But what I also want to show here is the cartoon itself, because it is very similar to many cartoons that we see throughout the fight for the right to vote, right? In which the women are portrayed as these ugly, big women that are overpowering the poor husband that is almost like shaking and everything. So it is not in the US only or in Europe, all over the Americas, there were these kind of cartoons. But this one in particularly, I found it very funny that we have that. So unfortunately, the elections came in 1921 in El Salvador. For the first time, women registered to vote, but the press didn't cover the election because the government of El Salvador was manipulated by the United States, and the female votes were not counted, but many women participated in that. So actually, the first time that really women in El Salvador, for example, participated in an election was until 1950. So they have to wait almost 30 years after that. Argentina and Chile in the 1920s are going to be, for example, Argentina is going to be granting the right to vote in certain regional levels, but unfortunately by the 1930s, they lose that right. Chile did not grant any kind of rights yet by the 1920s, but more and more female organizations start emerging in this period of time, hoping to get the right to vote. The Female Civic Party, the Female Democratic Party, and Chile's Female Union, for example. And I still have a few minutes. Okay, so, and what about Mexico? Well, Mexico, some women participating in the Congress of Baltimore in 1922, and Yucatan state granted women the right to vote. And let me go back a little bit on my screen here, because I want to show where Yucatan is located and why that is important. So here is the Caribbean region, right? And this is Central America. This is Yucatan. So it is not a coincidence also why there was a socialist government in that area in the 1910s and 20s in Mexico, in the southern part of Mexico. And they are the first one in granting the right to vote. The very first group of women is called the Feminist League of Yucatan, with, for example, with these three founders: Beatriz Peniche, who was a teacher and made proselytism throughout the peninsula. But this is a very interesting one. Elvia Carrillo Puerto, she was the very first, one of the very three first local congresswomen in Yucatan, so local. But because of how her passionate she was about socialism and everything, she was called the Red Nun of the Mayab. And she had to quit in 1924, so she only served for 2 years because there was a lot of death threats against her, because her brother was the governor of Yucatan and the brother was killed in 1924. However, San Luis Potosí, Central Mexico, that has already been thinking on granting the right to vote, they invited her to live in San Luis Potosí, and she became again local congresswoman for that state from 1925 to 1926. Her agenda was very clear, and it was not just only the right to vote, the right to get divorced legally, using the women's right to divorce legally, using their own right to their own rights, right? Because before, divorce was only granted for men to start the legal process. Women could not start the legal process. So in this moment, her agenda is that women had also that right to start the legal process of getting a divorce. The right to birth control in the 1920s, the right to birth control and education. We have other people who are also part of these three women who being elected for our local congress in Mexico. This is Raquel Cicero, and she was elected by the Socialist Party of the Southeast. And Rosa Torres Gonzalez, that again, I want to emphasize, she is an indigenous woman, and in this case, she is going to be a councilwoman for the county of Mérida, the most important county in Yucatan. She's going to be part of the council. And of course, once the governor was killed, she was forced, like her other fellows, to renounce to their political positions. The rest of Mexico for the 1920s only, there is the first National Feminist Congress. San Luis Potosí gives them the right to vote for a while, from 1923 to 1926. Also, Chiapas and Tabasco do the same from 1925 to 1926. But nothing more beyond that happens in the national level. But in Ecuador, in 1920, Matilde Hidalgo, this lady that we see here, she was a medical doctor, and she said, well, in the Constitution of 1897 talks about, again, in general, about the rights of the citizens, but never says ciudadanos, but never says men or women, just ciudadanos. But again, it's the generic term used in masculine, but not necessarily it means that it's only men. So she registered to vote and make a petition. At the local level, they were like, no, this cannot happen. She continues fighting and fighting until her case goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Justice granted her the right to register to vote. And she voted for the first time in the national elections of May 1924. With that, she's the first woman in Latin America of participating in a national election. So we have other women who have been locally participating in elections up to this moment, but in a national election, she's the first one in participating in that. What happened? That many women follow her example, particularly in the coastal region, that is the most economically developed of Ecuador. Guayaquil is considered the wealthiest and industrial city of Ecuador. And of course, the women are going to ask the right to participate in regional and local elections, to the point that the very first standing congresswoman was elected in December of 24 in Guayaquil, and representing the region of Guayaquil, or the city of Guayaquil. So based on that, many women, they start fighting that, well, I mean, it's there. Well, why you guys don't give us the right? So the Constitution of 1929, Article 13 says, literally, clearly says, citizen in Ecuador is any Ecuadorian, man or woman, older than 21 and knows how to read and write. And with that, the Ecuadorian women became the very first women in Latin America with the full right to vote. Argentina, that had been very advanced at the beginning and had the support of many people, got the right to vote. The women got the right to vote in 1947, but they were able to exercise that right until in the elections of 1951. Chile, the same thing, granted in 1949, and participated in the elections of 1952, but only those who were not socialists or anarchists. If they have a record of being supporters of the socialists and the anarchists, they didn't have the right to vote. It was until 1970 where they finally have the parity to the right of men to vote, regardless of their ideology. Mexico was among the latest, 1953, and the elections, and participated finally in the elections of 1955. Brazil, I didn't write that, but Brazil granted the right to vote for some women in the 1940s, and then changed it to the 1950s. But Afro-Brazilian women did not get the right to vote until the 1980s. And Brazil is the only country that made clear that race matters, versus Argentina or El Salvador or Guatemala or Mexico, in which any woman, just for being a woman, they got the right to vote. In Brazil was different. So and of course I'm running out of time, and my PowerPoint was getting very long, but it is very interesting because even when it was laid the right to vote, then there was a lot of progress. We have women with that are Black, that have been head of the states, or the very first elected president, for example, was in the 1980s, Violeta Chamorro, but the very first female president was in Argentina with María Estela Pavón, or Isabel Perón, sorry, when she substituted, as a vice president, had to substitute her late husband. And from there, we can talk about the diversity of women who had achieved these important positions in politics. It's slow, nobody denies that, but there have been at least 5 or 6 very important female presidents in Latin America, several female vice presidents. For example, Costa Rica was the first Afro-Costa Rican vice president elected 2 years ago. She's still in her position. The very first female elected president that was impeached was Dilma Rousseff. So there are many stories about that. That's for another talk. If Angela invites me one day to talk about that, I will be happy to talk about all that diversity of women of different ethnic backgrounds also making it into politics in one way or another. So any questions?
Always there are questions, and remember, everybody, you can type them in the chat. Can we go over a little bit? Aria, are you okay? Okay, so if you've got questions, feel free to put them in the chat.
Or you can also
unmute yourself. Yeah, you can. This is a small enough group. Unmute yourself and you can ask the question. Go ahead, Barb.
You talked about El Salvador, that women were going to be able to vote, but then the U.S. manipulated them. What happened there? Why did the U.S. manipulate them? What was going on there?
As I mentioned in that part, from 1898 to 1934, the politics of the U.S. was invading the Caribbean region and Central America for any reason, for anything that was against the interest of the United Fruit Company and the interest of the U.S., the countries could be invaded. So El Salvador, I think it was because in 1930, in 1930, there was an attempt to, nationalize land from the United Fruit Company, and the U.S. didn't like that. So in consequence, there was a military coup, and the president of El Salvador had to quit. The new president, who was a puppet of the U.S., came and said, no, women do not have the right to vote. But this was not the first time. For example, Cuba, that for a while was the colony of the U.S., well, how does the U.S. call it very, very polite?
A territory.
A territory. But the truth is, it was a colony. Anyway. So Cuba, when Cuba gets the independence from the U.S., there is an amendment called the Platt Amendment that says U.S. reserves the right to invade in any moment for any reason that is against their own interest. So, for example, in 1912, Cuba granted women, 1914, so excuse me, 1914, Cuba grants the women the right to start the process of divorce. And that was enough to say, U.S. say, hey, we're going to invade you, Cuba, or you take that right from women. So just the right to vote. And they said, it's because this is a bad example for American women. So very simple things.
We do have a question in the chat. Are there any areas in Latin America where there is still discrimination against women's rights? Is there a literacy requirement anywhere?
No, not that I know. for example, Brazil was one of those that were asking for the right for literacy rights. And this has been changed probably in the 1990s, 1980s. Almost everywhere they took out the illiteracy part or the literacy part or literacy requirement. And for a while in several countries, what could be a good example of that? Chile or Uruguay would be great examples. They, in their constitutions, they said women can vote if they can prove they have enough funds that the electoral law requires. So, and that was for men and women. So if you cannot prove that you have enough money, then you could not be a citizen. That was, for example, in Mexico until 1917. People, illiterate men and men who could not prove that they have enough funds could not vote. But the Constitution in 1917 granted that without saying illiteracy. But it is no longer a requirement, but it was taken out of the constitutions or the electoral laws probably in the 1970s, 1980s in different countries in Latin America that may have had that requirement.
We had a poll tax in the United States as well. So there was a financial requirement that effectively kept poor people and anybody of color and women out of the voting booth as well for a long time because of the poll tax. So, but I'd like to ask another question, drawing a bit of a comparison between the United States and some of these other countries. So some of the movements either coincide with the same era of women in the United States working for suffrage, but some of the Latin American countries have progressed well beyond the United States, even if they got the right to vote after the United States did in 1920. Like you said, there are many women who have been presidents of these countries and vice presidents of these countries, and we're struggling with our first one potentially now. And so the granting of the right to vote and the loss of the right to vote is curious for me. So women in the United States were never granted the right to vote, but they worked for it and they tried to exercise it. And the US Constitution doesn't specifically deny women any rights. It just also doesn't specifically grant them rights. And so, some of the most famous suffragettes tried to vote and then sued when they were prohibited from voting, for example, and lost. But the getting the right to vote and then losing the right to vote, is it part of the Latin culture? But that's not necessarily a fair question, because technically the United States is a Latin culture as well. But is it the macho culture of the South, if you will, that worried about women having authority or power that they couldn't manage because they are the weaker sex?
Yes, I completely agree with that. I would say not only is the product of the macho effect, because if you think about it, that was exactly why Cuba was going to be invaded, right? Because here in the US, how come a woman can start divorce, right? So that is, can you tell me that that's not macho? But yes, not denied, not denied on that. It actually is not, we cannot deny that despite the fact of how many, the progress in the female political participation to the point that there have been even presidents and congresswomen and governors and whatnot, and a full diversity of races, still also violence in Latin America against women is humongous. So even when there have been all of these, at the same time, there is not enough on that to stop machismo and to stop the gender violence. But I think also one of the reasons of why in Latin America there has been moments in which we granted the right to vote, we take the right to vote, is related to religion.
Oh.
Because Catholicism. So many politicians concerned with the funny, because socialists were the first ones in supporting women to the right to vote. But then later on, some of them concerned with the fact that women were going to be influenced by the Catholic Church in how to vote, they decided to vote against that. And they took the right to vote from women. But it was not just only from the left. There were also center parties that took that right, voted for that, because there was the concern that women were going to be more influenced from the Catholic Church.
Interesting.
And for example, and in Mexico, there is also this thing in which there was a concern about the how women were going to vote, because the presidential candidate from the right was very good looking, and the presidential candidate from the center, the official party, was not that good looking. So they decided probably not this time until
How funny.
this guy is over. Mm-hmm.
So when you give women the right to vote, they do crazy things, right? So I had this debate with my father at one point. He said, well, you know, in the United States, when women got the right to vote, first thing they did was get rid of alcohol. And I said, which amendment got rid of alcohol? Which amendment started prohibition? Anybody know?
I don't know.
It's the 18th Amendment. Which amendment gave women the right to vote?
The 19th. Yay!
So, hello. So, like, Dad, wait a minute. You know, so the conflict, or the argument that, you know, women will do crazy things if they have that kind of power, is U.S. history as well, which of course is false. But nonetheless, let's see. So, did you find in your research of suffrage movements in Latin and South America that a common thread is education, the ability to read, and the use of publications that would reach a lot of women and tell them what they should be, you know, striving for?
Oh, yes, yes. In many of these women, when I realized that I was running out of time, I had to cut many of the things that I had. Many of these women either write in different newspapers, or literally they organized groups and went to different areas, to indigenous parts of their country, or work with different workers, factory workers, or seamstresses, and market women, and educated them on why that was the need of stop the conditions in which they were living, right? I mean, because it's exploitation, they are second class, machismo is just very, what could be the best word? Not dangerous, I'm not going to say, but really machismo really affects the society. So, and many of them, even when they were super radical feminists, they will twist their arguments when presenting to men in order to get their support by saying, if we educate women, we're making better Mexicans. So because women are in charge of the families, so we need to get them the right to education. But in order with that comes also, if we give them the right to vote, we can allocate more resources for certain areas that lack teachers. So, but the idea was like, in pro of the Mexican family, or in pro of the whatever family, if that was the case. So they some of them were very good at twisting depending of their audience.
Cool. Anybody else for another question? All right. Well, I would like to thank you, Dr. Taxi. This has been really interesting. It's, the whole time you were talking, I was just going through my brain with all of the comparisons to the United States. And so I'll put in one more plug for the 19th Amendment, ratified this week in 1920. Exercise your right to vote, everyone. Jeannette Rankin was the first woman to hold office in the U.S. Congress, and she was elected from the great state of Montana in 1916, before the rest of the country got the right to vote. As a method of attracting women to move out to those territories, the people living in the territories, the Montana, etc., always offered women the right to vote, because that was they could own property and they could vote, they could get education, etc. That was a mechanism for attracting them to those regions. And so, as you just pointed out, in all of these parts of Latin America, empowering women has been a boon for the entire society. And so, woman or man, take advantage of your opportunity to voice your opinion and vote. So on behalf of the Peoria Area World Affairs Council, thank you so much for a fascinating presentation. Remember, next week we have our Friday event with Dr. Hassan Yunus from the American University in Beirut at 11 a.m. He will give us a rundown of what's going on in Lebanon. He was already on the schedule before the horrific explosion last week. And so he's got a lot to talk about. Be ready for some good questions and to hang out a little longer so that he can tell us the full story of what's going on in Lebanon. That is next week. And again, follow us on Facebook. We have an Instagram account. We have a Pinterest account. If you have not yet renewed your dues, please do that and join us. And we'll see you next Friday. Thank you again. Good night, Dr. Toski.
Thank you.
Lots of clapping.
Thank you
Good.
so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Have a great weekend, everybody. Good night.